And welcome to lesson 6 of the Dictator course, Stalin's Russia video lessons. We're going to carry on with where we left off in lesson 5, where we looked at the background to leadership struggle in order to understand the kind of factors that will influence the debate, as well as understanding the at least stated ideological goals and debates. Although if we remember from the end of the last lesson, although they will be debating these ideas of world revolution and industrialization and where the greatest threat comes from, in reality these are a proxy or a pretext for essentially political decisions. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the leadership struggle step by step. Now, you should have already looked at this before, so this is should be very much filling in and adding evidence and detail to the existing story. So, this starts with the funeral of Lenin. Lenin, if you remember last or 2 lessons ago, didn't really want a cult of personality or a state funeral, but after he was dead, it kind of served everyone's interests, particularly Stalin's, as we shall see, to have a big state funeral to celebrate Lenin's life and highlight his importance. And since he was dead, who was he to complain? The funeral involved the ultimate cult of personality of Lenin being essentially gutted, covered in formaldehyde and pickled, so his corpse could be viewed in Moscow by anyone who wishes to see it, and it's still there to this day, although its head is made out of wood, I believe, because the old one rotted. The funeral itself was attended by almost all leading Bolsheviks, and the exception was Trotsky. Trotsky was not present for the funeral. The reason being is that Stalin, as the General Secretary, as the person responsible for the petty administration, had been told to tell everyone when the funeral was going to be. And he gave Trotsky the wrong date. So Trotsky did not bother to go up, as he was currently resting or convalescing, so that's recuperating from his quote-unquote illness, his mystery illness, down in the south. And this means that Trotsky is notably absent from any of the videos and is noticed to be absent when the rest of the Communist Party is there. This certainly reinforces the suspicion of him, and certainly reinforces the image that he is aloof and arrogant, the fact that he doesn't even turn up for the dear leader's funeral, and really hurts his credit. Now, some people can say this is Stalin's political skill, and it certainly is a good use of his office on this part. But you can also argue to rely on only one person to find out the funeral, and this is something that was widely publicised, hints of a failure of Trotsky's side to not even have the curiosity to try and find out of his own, or even bother to sort of keep abreast of it. You know, it's not something hidden, and yet he falls like a moron, hook, line and sinker for Stalin's ruse. And therefore doesn't turn up. So although, yes, technically he was manipulated, this would also fit quite nicely into the argument that his own weakness, his own slight incompetence and complacency is also at work here. In addition, Stalin, as someone in charge of organising elements of this event, as the General Secretary, makes sure that for the cameras he is front and centre. He is stood next to the corpse, he's at its head, he is associated with Lenin, and he plays the part as almost of a son who had lost his father. The reason this is really, really important is that the future of this struggle will involve Stalin getting legitimacy, particularly from the less educated and less longer-term members, by making himself out to be Lenin's natural successor, i.e. the person who Lenin would have wanted and should really follow Lenin's leadership after his death. This is often, for many Russians, the video reels of Stalin standing at the head of Trotsky carrying the coffin and so on, is the first image many people have of the leadership, and it helps reinforce that eventual mission. So again, it's Stalin positioning himself effectively to sell himself and sell a certain narrative that will help him down the line. So with the funeral packed over, Trotsky has already become slightly politically weakened, and Stalin is pretty strong. But there should have been a really easy knockout blow against Stalin with the testament that we mentioned 2 lessons ago. It was, as ordered, delivered to the Central Committee by Lenin's wife after his death and asked to be read out. Now, it was withheld by the Central Committee. The reason they withheld it is because, number one, it criticised everyone, and therefore no one really wanted it out because it hurt their position and their standing. Number two, no one really wanted to help Trotsky, and Trotsky was seen as the one who was insulted or attacked the least of the group. And finally, some students go, well, why didn't they use this opportunity to destroy Stalin? Remember, they think Stalin is just a bureaucratic idiot. Why would you take this political hit of you being blamed so that the paperboy gets kicked out of office? No one really buys into the idea that Stalin is a threat. So there's no real need to publicize it in order to get rid of Stalin. So because of that, no one really wants to release it. No one wants to help Trotsky, and no one sees it as worthwhile trade-off for getting rid of Stalin, because Stalin is not considered threatening. So essentially, Stalin escapes what would have been a massive knockout blow, a massive sort of thing to get rid of him, because of the self-interest and the complacency of the members of the Politburo and Central Committee, the senior Bolsheviks, of which all our protagonists are part of. In 1924, we have the Party Congress, or what was known as the 13th Party Congress, where a number of key decisions are made. The first one is that they move over to a situation where Party Congress delegates have to be approved by the party. So, i.e., the local parties can nominate who they want to go into the Party Congress, but though they can only nominate who they want from a set list of approved individuals. Now, in these early years, the people who approved are just Bolsheviks, because there was a fear that people coming to Party Congress were non-Bolsheviks. They were socialist revolutionaries, they were Mensheviks, or they were people who were just in it for a job. And this was sold as a way to make sure that only proper communists get the job. Now, while that is true for this Congress, Stalin will use this in the future when he has more power, because he's the person in charge of approving who gets on this list, to control who gets on and make sure only people loyal to him will get onto the list to be a delegate. So the first thing is, although it does not get immediately held, by having a rule where in order to be eligible to be picked for the Party Congress, you've got to be approved, brackets, basically by Stalin, not officially, but it goes through the Secretariat, who then have a big role, and Stalin is the head of the Secretariat. This means that there's somewhat a high degree of control over who becomes in the Party Congress, and therefore this gives Stalin an advantage for patronage. I.e., if you want to go up in the world and if you want to get to Party Congress, you have to do a favour. They have to do a favour for Stalin, i.e., vote his way. Trotsky spends the majority of this Congress ill, and when he's not ill and he's there, refusing to make friends or negotiate or backroom deal with anyone because of his aloofness. And that means that the Lessons of October, which is publicised in 1924, ends up only harming him more. So what is the Lesson of October? It is a book written by Trotsky. And who might it be about, considering it's called The Lessons of October? Well, of course, it's Zinoviev and Kamenev, 2 men who refused to who argued against the October Revolution. And this is basically a very thinly veiled attack on those 2 individuals. Now, this is a big deal, because in theory, Kamenev and Zinoviev are the only other people on the left, or major people on the left, who could make an alliance with Trotsky. And here is Trotsky going, they are cowards, Lenin didn't like them, and they are not fit for purpose Bolsheviks, particularly attacking Zinoviev, who was notoriously thin-skinned. And so, not only does he punch Zinoviev and Kamenev, his only real natural allies, in the face, he's then not there to try and make up any damage or try and explain it or whatever. And so what ends up happening is the idea of Trotskyism is first mentioned on the Party Congress floor. Notably, this is not by Stalin. This is by Stalin's behind the scenes, and he says, I support you, comrade Kamenev and Zinoviev. But Zinoviev and Kamenev, upset about the almost attack on them, they are more than happy to attack Trotsky back. They argue that Trotsky, influenced by Menshevikism, so the Menshevik idea, has gone away from the teachings of Lenin, the ideas of Lenin, and is actually betraying the cause. So essentially we have a fight between the left and within the left who are split themselves. You have Trotsky on one side, and then you have the Kamenev and Zinoviev on the other side. Now, it's important not to overdo this. Zinoviev and Kamenev probably would have taken on Trotsky regardless, because he was the most likely to become leader afterwards and the greatest threat, and also not very popular. So they were already against him. But the lesson of October, and then Trotsky not doing anything about trying to make friends of it, is a massive, massive punch to the face, which means that not only do they carry on going against Trotsky, they put far more force and anger into it. So, after accusing Trotsky of diverting from Lenin, Trotsky is accused of factionalism, first deployment, not by Stalin. This is again Zinoviev and Kamenev, particularly pushed by Zinoviev. They basically argue that because Trotsky has his own set of beliefs outlined in Lesson of October, that is against the party line, which Trotsky loses the vote on because he doesn't have his support in the party congress, and is condemned. Now, who votes for Trotsky being a factional and who votes against? Well, Trotsky has his own base of support in the army, and they say, well, no, Trotsky's not a faction, he is following Lenin. And surprise, surprise, the supporters of Zinoviev, Bukharin, Kamenev, and Stalin all go against him. So obviously Trotsky loses the vote. Now, interestingly, this is the first sign of Stalin's clever tactics. Stalin realizes if he is the one to do the attacking and the most vocal, he looks political, he looks like he's overly ideological, and he will anger people. But Stalin's skill all the way through this is always to be allied to the biggest group, but never the people leading the charge. So Zinoviev shouts and screams at Trotsky, demands his expulsion, and Stalin agrees with him and votes with him about the fascism, but trying to illustrate himself as a moderate and as a reasonable guy who just wants everyone to get on. Because Zinoviev's doing the work against Trotsky for him, he decides to almost pretend to be more moderate. And he says, well, steady on, comrade Zinoviev. Trotsky is definitely a faction, but we shouldn't expel him because we want to work together. This is not something he believes. But since Zinoviev is already doing the work he wants him to do, Stalin is able to position himself politically against the more extreme side and helping get support from the centre ground. In addition, there is a promotion of Bukharin as Trotsky gets weaker. Bukharin is seen as someone who should be put into the Politburo, almost to offset, and he therefore gets a period of position of power, something Stalin is instrumental in, and means that Bukharin is quite thankful and friendly towards Stalin as a result. That will become a problem for him in the future. And the final big thing is something called the scissors crisis. The scissors crisis is, if you've got a graph, they had on the graph two lines, one going up from the bottom left to the top right, one going from the top left to the bottom right, i.e. crisscrossing over like scissors. One was prices, so prices were rising over time, and the amount of stuff being produced as a result, because prices were rising, was declining, because what was the point of making stuff if food prices were getting high anyway? And this is a bad thing. And this stimulates an argument against the NEP and a debate about industrialization. Something which Trotsky strongly argues, yes, we need to get rid of industrialization. But everyone else, Bukharin because he genuinely believes in the NEP, Zinoviev and Kamenev because although they don't like the NEP, they also don't like Trotsky and they don't want to agree with him. And Stalin, always going the majority quietly in the background, say, actually, we should keep with the NEP. So the NEP ends up being a politicalized issue where people who like it or don't like it are on the same side, because it's not about the NEP. It's about isolating Trotsky and making sure that he is seen as the outsider and he is a faction. So this situation only gets more with So this is a real move. So at the present, we've got everyone versus Trotsky, also known as the triumvirate, where we have Trotsky, Zinoviev, Kamenev, and Stalin working together against Trotsky. Well, in the 14th Party Congress in 1925, we see a shift over. Trotsky is now again absent due to illness and doesn't use much time to argue against himself, although everyone attacks him continuously and it only hurts him. Bukharin attacks Zinoviev's arguments about world revolution because Zinoviev, obviously is head in the Comintern, argues that world revolution is positive. Why would he do this? Well, who else is a proponent of world revolution? Trotsky. It is an unpopular idea by association. So Bukharin brutally and personally attacks Zinoviev, his personal life, his morals, and so on, and also says his ideas of world revolution are flawed. You notice it's Bukharin. Stalin is the one quietly egging him on in the background, but trying to appear in the background like a neutral party, someone relatively nice, relatively decent, but in behind the scenes he's egging Bukharin on. Again, another example of because these people do not think Stalin is particularly important or a threat, happily fighting amongst themselves while Stalin gathers support. And there ends up being a vote in the party congress about this. And what ends up happening is, in order to punish Zinoviev, Trotsky supporters vote against him, saying world revolution is bad, even though they are pro-world revolution. Bukharin and his supporters obviously vote against it. Zinoviev supporters vote for world revolution. Kamenev supporters are a bit split, and they don't really get involved. Stalin supporters and the average person, because Zinoviev is very unpopular, end up going against the average person in the party congress who has one of the smaller people who are less important as their patron, vote against it. And Stalin, particularly behind the scenes, manages to deliver votes against Zinoviev for Bukharin for 559 to 65. And as part of this, and as a tool for this, and in order to persuade the Trotskyite supporters and some of the Kamenev supporters to go against Zinoviev, he revealed what was then up until that point relatively secret amongst only the Central Committee and the Politburo, publicly, that Zinoviev had wanted to get Trotsky expelled and Stalin had stopped it. And this had really weakened his support and therefore helped explain why Trotsky, even though they hate Bukharin, go against Zinoviev, because again it's that personal rivalry. So what this defeat does is it really shows how Kamenev and Zinoviev are relatively unpopular and isolated, although yes, they have powerful bases of support in the party congress with Moscow and Petrograd. The majority of the party congress are not those. Most of them are the bigger part of Russia, and realize that then they only really have popularity and, more importantly, control in those areas. And as soon as that is so publicly shown by the 559 to 65 voting margin, it really means that when they come up to speak in the party congress, people know that they are weaker. A lot of power is about image, is about the fact that people think you're powerful. When you are shown to be weak, it means that your authority is weakened. And this shortly means that Kamenev is removed from the Sovnarkom and not re-elected to Politburo, although because he's popular, Stalin and Bukharin are very clear to make clear it's because of his age and his mind, as opposed to his political belief. Which something you can easily trash Zinoviev, but Kamenev, you've got to be a bit more careful with and sell it politically. And this removes Kamenev from positions of power. The balance of that is, well, Kamenev was not ambitious or creative enough to really use these as real positions of power anyway, so it's not the end of the world. And Trotsky is forced to deny charges of Bonapartism. If you remember, that's the idea that someone who will, using the military, seize power and undermine revolution. And what they say to him is this: you are a Bonapartist. He says no. They say he is. He says no. They say, well, you've chosen to be in charge of the army. He says, but I'm only in charge of the army because Lenin put me there. And so they say, well, surely if you want to prove to us you aren't a Bonapartist, you'd surrender the Commissariat of War. And he tries to resist it for a little bit, but they go, it's interesting that you still haven't decided to get rid of it. And they use that line to basically force him to surrender the Commissariat of War, to stop being a Commissar of War. This is very clever play by Bukharin, Stalin and his supporters, and to a lesser extent Kamenev and Zinoviev supporters, but more so a terrible decision by Trotsky. Trotsky's only power base is the army. By surrendering the Commissariat of War, he will surrender control of the patronage network and therefore the votes of the army in the Politburo, the Central Committee, and more importantly the Party Congress, and therefore lose any base of what he already has. But also, his trump card was control of the army. The power comes out the barrel of the gun. By surrendering such an important political token, he has essentially made himself weak. Now, you can argue, well, what was his alternative? To use the Commissariat of War, have a second civil war? And you can say that's actually quite a lot to ask from him, and therefore it's unrealistic to make him expect him to do anything else. But you can certainly say, by surrendering the Commissariat of War so easily, he made a massive mistake, and therefore it's inevitable he will be removed shortly afterwards. So, the next year, in 1926, we have an emergence of united opposition. Kamenev and Zinoviev, maneuvered out of their offices, limited in their support, defeated and increasingly attacked because Trotsky's already been sidelined, ends up uniting with Trotsky. So we have this united opposition with Trotsky, Zinoviev and Kamenev. Now, if that had happened in 1924, maybe that would have been good enough. By 1926, a defeated pair of people are allying with someone who is deeply unpopular in the party, and therefore both end up becoming weaker as a result. Yes, they are added together, but they've already lost some support in the party congress and some support with their major offices that they have, which gives them power. And then, particularly for Zinoviev and Kamenev, for them to ally with the person who they've been calling for the last 2 years a traitor and Bonapartist really shows them as hypocrites and loses a lot of sympathy from the average rank and file member and the average person who is not beholden, not reliant, a client of one of these men or any of the other leading Bolsheviks. So it really undermines them. And so what ends up happening is, in 1927, shortly after, 1926, Trotsky is voted out of the Politburo because, well, he's seen as not being necessary anymore. He was voted out by the Central Committee. This is an evidence of the fact that Trotsky doesn't have the votes in the Central Committee anymore, and Zinoviev and Kamenev don't have the votes to support him, because the only way that happens is majority vote. So majority vote, Stalin, Bukharin, and the rank and file members all outnumber Trotsky, Zinoviev, and Kamenev in support, and therefore they can get rid of Trotsky in the Politburo. And after 1927, where there was something called the Shanghai Massacre, where the Communist Party in China was basically massacred in one day, this was used as evidence by Stalin to show that world revolution, brackets, Trotsky's idea, and Zinoviev's idea was failing, was a flaw, because they go, look at this thing, it failed. Why are we wasting our money, considering we spent so much money on the Communist Party of China, and now they are all the Chinese communists, or large chunks of them, have been murdered in Shanghai. And this is used as a tool to attack both Trotsky and Zinoviev and suggest that they are being factional by arguing against that. And they are forced out of the Central Committee. Remember, they've already lost their Politburo seats. Central Committee beyond that. So now they've not only lost Politburo, they've now gone down to the Central Committee. They then lost those seats. And now, therefore, it's hard for them to maintain control of people in a party Congress, because once you are not in the Central Committee or Politburo, you can't give out jobs anymore. You can't give out patronage anymore. You can't give out tasks. You can't give out rewards. You can't keep someone safe from investigation or punishment. And so therefore, their power base is even more erode, and people start trying to go elsewhere, often to Stalin, to try and secure their jobs. So if you're a supporter of Zinoviev and you see the fact that he's gone out of the Central Committee, you know where things are going. If you stay allied with him, you're going to lose your job eventually as well. Whereas if you move over to Stalin or Bukharin, and that Stalin, the nice moderate guy, just wants people to get along, he's always been in the middle, has never said anything offensive about anyone, okay, him, then you'll go with him and you become under his umbrella, under his power base. So what does Trotsky and Zinoviev try and do? Well, they make a ridiculous decision. They decide, in response to being expelled from the Central Committee, because that basically does not give them a voice in the party anymore and no way of motivating the party, they will try and force the Communist Party to pay attention to them by having a protest. Power does not come from protests in Russia. Power does not come from the masses in Russia. Power does not come from these locations. Power comes from within the party. It will have zero interests. And particularly Trotsky and Zinoviev, who are unpopular, them trying to organise a protest will not effectively work. But what will it do? It is now factionalism. And it gives them an opportunity. It gives Bukharin and Stalin, with Bukharin doing the shouting and Stalin in the background trying to make everyone get along, brackets, he's not, call for factionalism and easily expel both Trotsky and Zinoviev from the party. They had ceased to be contenders in the power struggle. So what happens next? Kamenev, being nice old Kamenev, gives a speech in December 1927 in the Party Congress, the 15th Party Congress, about the need for reconciliation. Let's just get a very Kamenev speaks. Why don't we get friends? They've made mistakes, and I agree, and we were right to expel them, but they're good communists, they're historical communists, and the important thing we need to do is we need to make friends. It is 100% Kamenev. This is a very poor decision, because now what are you doing? You are siding with a faction, which makes you a factional. So then they expelled him. Something very interesting is what happens while he is making this speech is 24 times during that one speech, Bukharin interrupts shouting against Kamenev. Now, this means that, Stalin stays completely silent. This is brilliant evidence for an essay to show how Stalin allows the other leading key individuals to take the political hits, to take the lead, rather than himself. Because when the Kamenev supporters or people sympathetic or who like Kamenev see this, even if they don't speak up for him, it makes them dislike Bukharin. And so when the next stage of the power struggle happens, and it's Bukharin versus Stalin, well, they go, well, Bukharin is such a rude man. He was already horrible to good old Kamenev. I'm going to start with Stalin. So ends up what happens is Kamenev is removed in December 1927 for basically supporting a faction, and Bukharin makes himself unpopular amongst anyone else left on the left. And so the same party Congress says that if you support the United Opposition, you cannot be a Communist Party member, and it allowed Stalin to pretty much use his position to purge anyone from the party who is associated with being friends or allied with Kamenev or Zinoviev or Trotsky, unless you show loyalty to Stalin. And so what ends up happening, there's a whole bunch of people removed from the party Congress, or people whose jobs have been saved because they pled loyalty to Stalin instead. And who are they replaced by? Well, let's go back to that very first 13th Congress, first sub-bullet point. They are picked from a list of approved delegates, which by now, because it's just Bukharin and Stalin has the balance of power now because he is more sympathetic and popular than Bukharin from everyone who's not right-wing and NEP, okay, he ends up picking and making sure that replacements are people loyal to him. So, what ends up happening is, in 1928, with their power bases destroyed, Stalin advocates that Kamenev and Zinoviev should be readmitted to be party members, not in the Politburo, not in the Central Committee, not in their old jobs, not in the Party Congress, just members. And who makes it very public after seeing the open letters published publicly begging for how wrong they were? Who makes it public that they support this? Stalin. Stalin, the good old, just wants things to get by. The guy who was silent as Bukharin shouted rudely into Kamenev, the old man. And so what ends up happening is Stalin not only gets rid of his enemies, he then gets the benefit of it from their increased sympathy. So what does Stalin do? He then turns on Bukharin. So Bukharin is almost instantly turned upon. Now, Bukharin initially tries to make friends with Zinoviev and Kamenev to try and get some sort of block against Stalin because he senses he doesn't have a power base. Zinoviev and Kamenev are in no mood to help Bukharin, who has been so rude and leading the attacks on both of them. Bukharin, if you remember, taking on Zinoviev in the World Revolution, and Bukharin taking on Kamenev in the December 1927 speech. So they report him and use this as evidence against Bukharin as factionism. Now, Bukharin's only power base is in the media, and his allies Tomsky and Rykov, who have power in the trade unions and power in the state, to try and build support for him. Okay. However, Bukharin is not cynical enough compared to Stalin. But Bukharin is not brutal or zero-sum enough. Because although he has power of the media, he allows Stalin to use the media to sell his own propaganda, and also refuses to attack Stalin publicly, preferring to keep it private between them, because he wants to keep the calmness of the party and keep the party unified, whereas Stalin obviously has no such qualms and would certainly not use his power base to help Bukharin. And therefore, although, yes, Bukharin has the media, that doesn't matter, because votes don't matter. Or public votes, or public opinion doesn't matter. It is your ability to marshal votes in the Party Congress and in the Central Committee. And at each stage, every time someone has been removed and their power base has been removed, Stalin has been largely the one to replace them and replace the people who get their new jobs. They therefore owe their jobs to Stalin. So what we've had is Bukharin's power base has basically stayed constant, but Stalin, through removing and replacing or saving supporters of Zinoviev and even some of Trotsky and Kamenev by saying, you either say you're loyal to me or you leave, and they obviously say loyal to him to keep their jobs, has now got the vast majority in the or had got a significant majority in the Central Committee and in the Party Congress. So therefore, although yes, he has a base of power, it is nowhere near good enough. Now, in February 1928, Stalin moves to try and get rid of some of Bukharin's power base, some people in local parties and Party Congress. And this generates some anger and resistance from those local parties particularly. Stalin is smart enough to stop immediately and say, I'm sorry, mistake, I blame this guy, fire him. And that stops, again, Stalin's political savvy. Stalin is not just ruthless when he in his power, he also knows when not to be ruthless. And this is a good example of that. So he ends up not pushing that and leaving it be. In addition, when the Central Committee demands that the NEP, the challenge to the NEP, should be stopped, he does. So, by the way, something I didn't mention, Stalin, once Zinoviev and Kamenev got rid of, Stalin can now take the left-wing position that NEP is bad and accusing Bukharin of being a capitalist. Part of that is Stalin demanded and started requisitioning grain, that is taking grain from the peasants, which destroys NEP. Now, Bukharin had managed to get that stopped, partly because of his own base of support, and partly because the Central Committee were not quite ready to stop NEP yet. Stalin stops that immediately. He completely agrees and he says, I'm not going to push it. And then waits a month, makes sure the Central Committee won't do that again, and restarts it, sabotaging the NEP from within. This creates problems in the Soviet economy because peasants start seeing the government taking their stuff and they start withholding ideas. But in general, the Soviet economy is also having difficulty. This only gives Stalin more arguments against Bukharin to say, Bukharin, look at Bukharin's NEP, it's not working. We need to have industrialization. We need to have socialism in one country, which is about creating ideas and creating jobs by having factories and getting rid of NEP. This is something which is very popular on the left, which is the majority party, particularly people who are already annoyed at Bukharin. This gives Stalin an opportunity to disagree with Bukharin in a way that's not factional, and this gives Stalin an opportunity to paint Bukharin as a capitalist, because Bukharin is then forced to defend the NEP. Now, what Bukharin's response is he releases Lenin's testament, but in reality, this does not go massively public, and this is only used as evidence against him for being factional, because the Central Committee in 1923, 1924, had said we're not going to release this, and him releasing it therefore shows he's going against the party line, and now he's being a faction. So in reality, this does not do damage, but this is also perfect evidence of the fact that it's not if you're good, it's not if you're liked, it's not if you're ideological, it's not even if you're good to close to Lenin, because by 1928 Stalin has almost complete control of the Party Congress, to a lesser extent the Central Committee and the Politburo. Yes, that goes around the Party Congress and the Central Committee, but nothing happens because they will always vote for Stalin regardless because they've been told to. So it doesn't have the impact and only limits it. And as a result of this, at the start of 1929, there's enough evidence to remove Bukharin from the Politburo for being a capitalist, ideological deviancy, and also remove all his allies, Rykov, Kalinin, and so on, are all removed. Some for being ideologically impure, Rykov, some for personal problems, embezzlement, and having a mistress. Something which Stalin found out about in his office or of the head of the party, because they are also responsible for maintaining an eye on everyone. So the only other thing to mention is Trotsky is internally exiled by 1928. That means he's not allowed. He's only allowed in the vast Siberian wastes of the West, and then the next year is forced out of Russia permanently to stop him having an influence. So, by 1929, all the top rivals have been removed, and you could argue that because he's removed his rivals, he has got control of the state. That is not the case. As we shall see in the future, he does not have full control over Congress, the Central Committee or the Politburo, and they will work against him, because although there are people who he has bought off, they are not necessarily people who have complete slavish loyalty who do whatever they want. The problem with having to bribe someone is you have to keep bribing them, and they always have free will. If someone is loyal to the point of fault, will always do what you want, they don't need to be bribed, and they will always stay on your side. And in reality, the other thing to mention is, although yes, Stalin has got rid of his opponents in the top 1% of the party, the Party Congress, the Politburo, and the Central Committee, he hasn't really done much about the middle or lower party positions, the local regions. Zinoviev and Kamenev supporters are rife in Petrograd and in Moscow. Okay, and therefore there are people in all around the state, in the vast majority of the government, who are not loyal to Stalin in those places. And in reality, the Russian people still had an own little real concern or control or like for Stalin. Many of them don't even know his name. So although Stalin has got rid of his enemies, and therefore he has passed the first stage of being in power, he doesn't have complete power. There's a large part of the state, the central state, a large part of the rest of the government, and the large part of the population who are not sympathetic to him. And therefore, although he has power by this point, he does not have control.